When I was doing the background work for my review of Matt Rife's latest Netflix special, I found an article in GQ magazine that discusses how punk rock dealt with the Nazi element in its community back in the 80s. I saw some parallels there between Nazi punks in the 80s and what's happening now with the cruelty profiteering wave in comedy. So I reached out to the author, Steve Knopper, who agreed to talk to me about those parallels. I can't thank Steve enough for that. And thank you also for watching. Now, there's a lot of coarse language ahead, some of which I've cut out of the audio in the most egregious of cases, but do be warned. I'm Jim Hodgson. I'm appearing here as Comedy Zola. My focus is on how cruelty is kind of creeping into comedy, and I saw some potential similarities between your oral history of Nazis and punk and the state of comedy writing. So, again, I can't thank you enough for the time.
Sure, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, let me brag about you a little bit. First of all, I just want to say how jealous I am of your credits. You're a Billboard editor at large, former Rolling Stone contributing editor. You wrote MJ, The Genius of Michael Jackson. I haven't gotten to that one yet. That's on Scribner, but I am reading Appetite for Self-Destruction, Spectacular Crash of the Record Business in the Digital Age. That's on Free Press. Came out in 2009. It's quite a saga, and this is a book written by a guy who really knows about it. So I'm speaking to you, audience. Get this book.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, and that book is now self-published. So it's if you buy the version of it that's on Amazon, then the money goes straight to the author, which I always like. So
Nice. You took the power back.
I took the power back. It's a long story, but it did come back to me. I re-released it with a new chapter and a new cover, and now it's mine. So
Oh,
it's
nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
empowering.
when I got a publishing contract, I immediately put on my calendar years in advance the day when I would get the rights back.
Oh,
So,
nice. Love that.
do people ever sort of confess to you that they want to understand punk better, but um, maybe are having a little trouble getting into it? I mean, do people ask you to serve as kind of a punk rock sommelier in that way?
A little bit. I am not, I mean, I'm a punk rock aficionado and I've studied the history and read the books and listened to all the music and stuff. But I don't present as a punk rocker, I don't have
Yeah.
any tattoos, I don't have any piercings or anything. I've been to lots of public punk rock concerts in my life, and when I was going to some of them in the 80s and the early 90s, you would see this there's aggression involved in punk rock. And I think the bands in punk rock, they were struggling to keep their political coalition together, and because yes, people got it. Lots of people got it. And they would show up to the gigs and they would go, "We're with you." And this was
Mhm.
a community of people. And I think it started like that. That was the root of it. It was grassroots. But then inevitably, just as all Kurt Cobain used to complain about all the frat boys showing up at Nirvana shows, the same kind of thing happened only with early punk rock shows. And it still happens to this day. I mean, I think that's in my article too. You get people who just want to fuck shit up because they want an outlet for their aggression. And that's when you get the skinheads coming. And then you get the Nazis and the people with the swastika tattoos and their shoelaces of certain colors and tied in a certain way. And then after that, you get like a backlash of straight edge people and anti-Nazis. And, then the whole thing kind of like spins down the rabbit hole. And so that's what I tried to capture a little bit as best I could in the article. But I think it's complex and complicated, and there's different levels to it. And then you have, and I don't think my article addresses too much, but then you have sort of like actual Nazi bands. But there were bands that were just capitalizing on the aggression and not on the sentiment. And I think I don't know, as we've discussed, I don't know nearly as much about comedy as you do, but I wonder if some of that same stuff is going on in comedy, where you get, a comedian who is like attractive and rebellious and subversive and wants to fuck shit up and is making these kind of progressive statements, but is also in a certain way attracting this element of people who just want to, fuck shit up. And it doesn't matter if it's punching up or punching down. The whole idea is to be honest and open about your feelings, and you start spewing out some stuff. And then the next thing you know, you've spewed out some offensive shit. Like it sounds like Matt Rife did that. I would add Dave Chappelle's recent long track record of commenting on the trans community.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of. I love Dave Chappelle. I'll watch almost everything he does, but I'm not a fan of that vein of his work. And I think there's lots you can name them. There's lots of other examples of that. Um, and there were punk bands that kind of wink wink, I'm gonna say this fascist thing in my work, and then that Nazi punks will understand that and they'll be invited to the show. I can't really think of any of those off the top of my head other than obvious Nazi punk bands.
Mm-hmm.
There was that element going on, but I think that maybe in comedy now it's a little bit more explicit because it's just people talking and they're saying all kinds of stuff. And then you get that element showing up to the shows, and then you have this whole community of people, and it's much more complicated because it's not everybody's part of the same, not everybody's laughing at the same jokes, probably. It's all, some people are what the comedian perhaps intends, being a certain kind of punching up progressive person, traditional satire. And then there's another element of going like, yeah, fuck yeah, punch her in the eye,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what Kurt Cobain was commenting on too, and he didn't like that. I have no idea whether Matt Rife likes that or not. Hopefully not.
It's undeniable, though, as a comedian, as you say, that when you say something, you control what you say, but you don't control how it's perceived. So, like, for everyone in your audience who is maybe able to appreciate something as a parody, or I don't think in Matt Rife's case it is, but the people who are fans and want to laugh at it will be, oh no, this is a parody. You can say whatever you want, and it's it's a very thin justification to me. But
Comedians, I think, are able to, in their medium, play with racism and prejudice and oppression more than I think punk rock bands are able to. There's nuances, and comedians can come out and sort of like I'm thinking about, God, I hate to use him as an example, but Louis C.K. will sort of say this stuff about race, and he'll kind of wink and nod and do that little look that he has. And that allows him to kind of get away with it or kind of comment on some racism as he's indulging in it. I think I've seen Amy Schumer do stuff like that as well. Again, I'm out of my element here, so you'll have to correct me if you think I'm not being fair to these comedians. But I think that the nuance as a comedian allows you to do that, and I think that just gets more confusing with everybody. Like maybe there at the time, in that time and space at a small club, it might make sense, but it doesn't when it gets out onto the larger internet, into the larger world. And punk rock bands, there's no internet in the 70s and 80s, and they were just kind of going, and nobody knew what they were saying anyway. And I think it's just a whole different dynamic, is what I'm trying to say.
There was that CK and Rock and some other folks did this kind of like roundtable. CK talks about using the N-word in his comedy, and he's sitting right there next to Chris Rock, and Chris Rock is laughing about it.
He's the blackest white guy I fucking know. And then all the negative things we think about black people, this fucker.
You're saying I'm
Yes, you are the fucking white man I have ever.
I wouldn't use it anywhere.
No, exactly. These two.
We
use
say
that
you're on stage.
on stage.
You guys don't. That's
Yeah.
an
That's the
interesting two
difference.
teams
That's
here.
the difference between
That's right. That's right.
You can't ask any person from any group to give you a pass to say anything, because the groups are not monoliths, and for all of those reasons that's problematic. But in the back of my mind, I'm watching these guys like just be more and more. I call it cruelty profiteering, but like to like keep pushing that envelope of gaining engagement for saying objectionable things, and the N-word is coming. We're already at using gay as a pejorative, and in a way, to me, it almost feels like an arms race. Like, who's going to be the first to go on Netflix and say that word as a straight white male? Maybe I'm imagining, again, tinfoil hat. Like maybe I'm imagining that exists, but it feels like, who's going to be the worst? Honestly, the whole thing is kind of turbocharged by the podcast universe, because you say your more objectionable things on the podcast, and then you kind of dial it back for your special because that's going on Netflix. But the stuff these guys say on their podcast is like, I mean, forget it. It's gross. And that I just feel like we're gonna go through what the punks went through with those guys in the 80s. And I think in a lot of ways for comedy, it's worse because those kids who are, as Rollins described them, but overweight kids, Sieg Heiling, like in the 80s, those guys did not have Facebook groups. They were not making money on YouTube. Like there was no Alex Jones style, path to monetization for them. And I think that's a huge difference.
There was no Donald Trump who's turning them into a political coalition.
Yeah.
I mean, they're more subtly, there were right-wing politicians who were doing that, but they weren't explicitly doing that. I don't mean to be naive. I know that's been going on forever, but I think the Donald Trump phenomenon of sort of, sending explicit messages that I'm going to be a friend of Nazis and I want you to vote for me. I feel like I've seen Mark Maron say almost exactly the thing that you're saying, which is just like, yeah, don't say those words. Like you're a comedian, you're at this level, you've got an audience. Now you have responsibility. You're smart enough that you can not do a joke that, encourages people to punch women in the eye. And then, oh no, I can't be responsible about what my audience does. Like that strikes me as being a weasel. And again, I'm talking out of my hat because I don't know Matt Rife's material. I haven't actually heard him deliver that joke. But if I assume that you're describing it accurately, and that's I don't agree with that. That's reprehensible. I don't think a comedian should go out, make a joke that encourages violence against women, wash their hands of it afterwards, and then go, it's just comedy, it's free speech, I should be allowed to say what I want. Comedians are, I don't agree with it. And I hear Joe Rogan doing a variation of that that's much more sort of subtle, and like his appeal, I think, comes from that outsider comedy, that outsider punk rock thing. But it's flipped. They flipped it. It's instead of being subversive and punching up as rock and roll has done, and much of the great, I would argue, all of the greatest comedy has done. They flipped it to make it be a tool of oppression. And Joe Rogan's really skilled at doing this in a subtle way where he doesn't have to come out and say it. Mm-hmm. He'll say, yeah, I'm questioning the vaccines. I'm going to bring on some experts who question the vaccines, and he's got this punk rock attractive delivery that goes with that. And it's very potent. And Donald Trump plays in that area, perhaps better than anyone in history. So I've watched that with interest and terror, and I'm hoping we're coming to the end of the line on that soon, because I want my subversive punk rock to go back to where it belongs.
Yeah, that's how I feel about comedy. I want to go back to feeling like, when Michelle Wolf gave that correspondence speech, it was just like, it just felt so, it feels so amazing to see somebody that good and that funny just deliver a message like like dropping a bomb, and like you see people squirming in the room. I mean, to me, that's just like, that's so delicious, but then in her most recent work, she's got this huge joke in the first episode of the series that's like an anti-trans thing. And it's like, et tu, Michelle? What are we doing?
I had not heard about that. I'm sorry to hear that, because I like her a lot.
I like her a lot, and I went through. I watched it. She did it as a series. It's not like a single piece special. She split it up. But in the first one, it's like, what? It feels to me like, and this is speculation, but it feels to me like if you're somebody like her and you want to continue to be sort of considered relevant in comedy, then you gotta put that stuff in order to be one of the gang for the ivermectin set, led by Joe Rogan. And it's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's such a difference between that and, as I mentioned, the 7 deadly words, like, I mean, and I feel like it's the same as, a kid needing that sort of like outlet for rage, and they go to a punk show and it it's just the energy and it's exciting and like, but there are some people who can do that without turning it into like an authoritarian trip. And I wonder, like, what do you think punk rock was able to do to kind of to make it clear, not just to themselves but to the world, that like we're for some stuff that is, is angry in some ways, but we're not for this garbage,
Yeah, well, again, and also, I think it's important not to sort of paint punk rock or comedy, for that matter, with one brush. Like the Dead Kennedys are a particular example of a band that had a political point of view that was very progressive and liberal. And there are others too. The Clash mostly, were like that, not always explicitly, but they stood up for the working man, for the working class. Sex Pistols, not so much. They're the ultimate punk rock band, and you listen to some of the Sex Pistols lyrics. One of my favorite bands ever, those two tracks, God Save the Queen and Anarchy in the UK, just on my all-time top 10. But then they have a song like Bodies, which strikes me when you listen to it really carefully as being a bit pro-life. And although it's ambiguous, and Johnny Rotten has clarified that over the years, but he went into the direction of being pretty conservative. He supported Trump in some ways that I found disturbing over the last few years. And there's other elements of that too in the whole punk rock movement. I do think that the majority of punk rock bands from that original wave tended to be liberal and progressive and sort of anti-Reagan and anti-fascist and anti-conservative. And we still have the music that's left to go back and judge. And some of that stuff has kind of like timeless anthemic quality that still work in today's politics.
Well, if we are to turn this into sort of a positive wrap up, which I'm not sure is possible, but it sounds like what you're saying is that if you're making good work and your intentions are good, if not pure, but at least you're going in the right direction, then sort of history remembers that work much more easily than just saying street jokes, for example, about women with black eyes. So like maybe if we're sort of suffering this and we're not enjoying it now, like this turn of comedy, that the stuff that we remember 10, 20 years from now will be the stuff that was, more positive.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. I'd like to think.
I hope I sound convinced. I don't know if I do.
I think you're right. And I'd like to, I'd have to go back, but I mean, I think that's a big question. Like, I think in the history of literature and art and music, and comedy and performance, like the stuff that is still relevant today is the stuff that comes from sort of this punching up satirical point of view. That's why you bring up George Carlin or, punk bands. That stuff has the timeless quality.
Thanks again to Steve Knopper. I hope you guys will check out his books and other works. All the links are below.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and maybe jump on the Patreon if you want to help me make more. And if you want to talk about comedy writing with people who are trying to do it in a constructive way, we also have a Discord channel.